Welcome to the Reify Online Learning Hub. In this lesson, we'll show you the power that data binding can provide. Data-bound components are smart components that know how to use a data source to configure themselves to load and store data. This means that you don't have to do much for your component and its fields to look and work perfectly. First, we'll add a layout to put our components in that will work with our data. We're going to add a split pane with a double click, which allows for a side-by-side display of components on a desktop and automatically switches to one component at a time on mobile devices. We'll add a list grid with a double click so we can see a list of records and bind it to the order data source, again with a double click. We'll now add a table layout form to the detail pane with a double click and bind it to the order data source with a double click. When you bind a data source to a form, the form automatically creates the right editing interfaces. For example, date fields have a date editor, and lists of values have a drop-down. You can also add your own fields that aren't stored on a data source, such as a checkbox for agreeing to terms and conditions. We'll resize the navigation pane with the resize bar. To give the grid more room, we'll make both panes about the same size. List grids know how to edit records from a data source without needing any extra configuration. You just turn the feature on by checking the Can Edit property. Reify grids also have a built-in interface for users to filter data. In the Property sheet, locate the Show Filter Editor property and simply check it to add a filter editor to our grid. If you don't want to show all the fields from the grid, just click the red X next to the field in the component tree. When you do this, your users will never have access to see that field in the grid. If instead you don't want to permanently remove fields but need to initially only show certain columns in the grid, right-click on any column header and use the Columns submenu to choose which columns are initially shown. Remember, whatever you see in Reify becomes the default view for your users. So now, let's take a quick look at what we've done so far by using the Preview feature. Double-clicking on a row in the grid shows all of the editors. Notice how these editors also match what we can see in the form on the right. We've already got a lot of power here, and it only took a few short clicks. Now, let's bind the grid to a different data source. Just drag the employee data source onto the list grid on the screen. Even though we have completely changed the data and fields in the grid, Reify remembers our settings and the grid is still editable by double-clicking any row. In the record being edited, click on the Office field to show a list of possible offices. The list grid offers an editing interface because the employee's data source was defined as being related to the Office data source. This is all automatic. You just define the relationship, and Reify's grids and forms will provide a UI for associating employees with offices, orders with customers, or whatever you want. The same data source can be viewed in multiple ways by multiple different components. Let's try replacing our list grid with a tree grid. Click on the red X next to the list grid in the component tree. Now, click the Yes button to confirm that you want to delete the grid. Instead, we'll now represent the data in a tree grid, which lets you view the data in a hierarchical form. For example, a tree grid of employees can show the reporting structure of the employees in an organization. So we'll add a tree grid with a double click and bind it to the employee data source to see how the data is displayed. Just click on the plus sign next to the record to see the hierarchy. The same data set can be viewed flat with a list grid or hierarchical with the tree grid. So now let's show you one more way you can view data. First, let's delete the tree grid that we just added using the red X as we did before for list grid. Now, we're going to take a quick look at our data in a tile grid. Essentially, a tile grid displays the records as a set of tiles, where each tile represents one record, and the tiles are laid out in a grid style with multiple records in each row. To add a tile grid, just double-click it. This time when binding, single-click the employee data source. Then, click the Custom Binding button. We've already selected a few fields for you to use, so just click on the single right arrow to choose to bind the tile grid to just those fields. To finish up, just click the Bind button to confirm the customized binding. And there you have it. You can see that only those fields chosen for the data binding are visible in the tile grid. Tile grids are yet another way you can view the same set of data. As with the list grid, individual fields can also be removed from a tile grid by clicking on the red X next to the field you want to remove. Data-bound components make it easy to build your application faster because the components know how to show and save your data. The work is done for you automatically, but the settings can also be changed as needed for your application.
Congratulations, you completed the tutorial. Reify is a new kind of low-code platform, one you can use on every project, not just for the simple ones. Reify is a radically faster, radically better way to work. Try Reify today for free.